Radio.
Welcome, 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 everybody to Morris Talk Live 100. I'm your host, Tarhaka Mental Bay, and this evening we're dealing with part 2, mental cognitive dissonance of those people who believe they are black in America. And once again, we'll be dealing with the same 7 questions that we had before. What is the solution to the mental health crisis among our people? How bad is the problem? Has America driven people insane on this land? What does a loss of identity have to do with it? What about black people's priority arrangements? What to do next? What does the future look like? And on and on. We're going to have the heavyweight sitting here with us this evening. Keep in mind that the chat room is open. Be courteous to one another up in there. And we will be converting this over to a video and put it up there on YouTube and do the best I can and putting out as much information. Now, a lot of this stuff is stuff you already know, but you have forgotten over a period of time. And these broadcasts, part 1 and part 2, is only a reminder to you of what we need to get right. Okay? We got Dr. Claude Anderson's book today. We'll be coming to you with some of that. Dirty Little Secrets about black history's heroes and other troublemakers. We'll be also hear from heavyweights, but before we get started, I'm going to the commercial break, and when I get back, we're ready to go. So y'all hold on a minute.
Let me make sure I got this right. You have a mortgage. You were told the bank would give you a loan for your home. But when you got to the bank, they didn't give you anything or sign anything. But presto changeo, you have a new mortgage. Then you find out your mortgage has been sold to another company you don't know and don't have any contract with. It seems to me something is wrong. When you walked out the bank, you had some papers in your hand, but no check. Let's get to the bottom, down to the bottom of this kind of stuff. Go to TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Let's bring the fraud to a close. How about that? This kind of stuff is going on all over the United States, but most people don't even understand what to do about it. TarhakaDebtElimination.org.
Okay. Now, it's something else that I want to get straight for the record. On question number 5, it says, what about black people's priorities and their arrangements? I have seen, and I want you to think about this now. Here's a young man. He doesn't have a place to stay. He decides he needs a car. Now, when he gets the car, his next thought, instead of trying to find somewhere to live, his next thought is to spend almost $2,000 on rims to put on his car. Think about that for a minute. Just think about that type of thinking, okay? Think about it. We don't have our priorities arranged properly. And so what we're going to do is we're going to delve down into tonight's podcast. And we're going to start off with the illustrious Dr. Claude Anderson. And he states the following in his book, Dirty Little Secrets, on in chapter 1. It says down here, at the bottom, it says, darken the mind and change the black tax. With this infamous Asunto de Negroes enslavement contract of the 1517, Spain not only became a major slave trading nation, it was the first nation to enact a public policy of enforced illiteracy for blacks. Now keep in mind, the Moors had already been expelled from Spain in 1492. Prior to the Asiento policy, black Americans in Spain or any Spanish territories who sought an education were allowed access to it. Blacks was represented in various professions throughout Europe as well as Africa. When Spain slammed the door on black enlightenment, it became the global model for planned black illiteracy. Juan Latino, a free black man, was probably the last person of his race to receive a college education in Spain before the crown and the hierarchy of the Catholic Church officially condoned black enslavement. In place of Indians, Latinos was awarded a bachelor's degree for the University of Granada at the beginning of 1500. He went on to become professor of grammar and Latin in Granada, Spain, and became a noted poet. He published his first book of poetry in the mid-1500s. Proceeds from the sale of his book must have surely come in handy, since during this same time period, Spain enacted a black tax. This was not a general tax. It mandated that free professional and educated blacks pay a special tribute or tax. 3 centuries later, free black males in southern states across America were required to pay a similar annual tribute called a capital tax. As with Juan Latino in the 1500s, free black males in America, regardless of educational achievement or profession, had to pay simply for existing. Isn't that something? I don't think we y'all knew about that, because I certainly didn't. And there's a whole lot of other stuff that we're going to find out about in this book here this evening as well. But we're going to hear from Claude. Come on in, Claude.
This evening on the Rock Newman Show, Dr. Claude Anderson coined the term powernomics, the intersection of race and economics. He joins us today to discuss his views on reparations, self-sufficiency, and closing the racial wealth gap. That's coming up right now on the Rock Newman Show. Welcome to the Rock Newman Show from the campus of historic Howard University, located in the nation's capital. I'm Rock Newman, and it is my desire to inspire you with personal stories of extraordinary achievement. My next guest, Dr. Claude Anderson, has written numerous books and produced several videos to help black folks move up from the bottom of the economic ladder, and he's not shy about saying how far we still have to go.
You have not moved one iota in acquiring the most significant and the most important thing in our society. It is not civil rights. It is not integration that's going to give you equality and equal opportunity. It is what you own and control that makes a difference in your society. If you own and control nothing, you'll get nothing. There is no equal opportunity without having the equal amount of resources and power and wealth to be able to carry it out.
Dr. Anderson, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, Rock, for inviting me to be on your show. I've looked forward to being on your show because I can't think of a better person to be with, particularly one who used to train boxers.
Well, I'll make sure I leave all those skills underneath the table as we talk here today. Dr. Anderson, I would like to start this discussion and try to frame it for those who know you and for those viewers who may not know you. Oftentimes when proponents of black equality and liberation express strong views, they may be telling a strong and accurate truth, but they get criticized, you get criticized for talking that black stuff, and the sense that when you talk about black empowerment, you are in some way discriminating against white people or others. How do you address that?
Well, very simply, Rock, first of all, let them know that every group on this earth understands that you're in a team relationship. Racism is a team sport. It came into existence as a team. You play as a team or you lose by default. And only with black folks do people get upset when black folks start talking about coming together and uniting and working together and cooperating together, buying from each other and supporting each other. You know why? For a simple reason that everybody understands when you come together and unify, that signifies strength. And right now, everybody right now is pimping and hustling black folks. They've been pimping and hustling black folks for 400 or 500 years. We spend approximately 97% to 98% of all our money outside of our own community, as an example. And we don't practice group economics. We don't practice group politics. All that makes, when we spend 98% of all our money outside of our community, what that does, it makes the other groups enriched. They now are living off of two incomes. They live off of 100% of their money and 98% of our money. And what are we left with is 2%. Where everybody else is living off of 100 and 98% of everything, we live off of 2%, which makes it impossible. And so you start talking about unifying black folks, that's a threat. They're saying, you're going to cut off your money from us? We're going to cut off, we're living off of two incomes. You're going to reduce us down to one income? That's a threat to them. Also, it's a threat when you start talking about unifying blacks and looking out for your own people. That means political possibility of uniting as a political force in this country, which nobody wants to see. That's a threat because all the rest of the people in society are living privileged lifestyles based on what they came in here and got as immigrants. Black folk never had those lifestyles. So, yes, it's a threat to them.
You have forcefully suggested that that is by design, that where black folks are in America today, and to some extent throughout the diaspora, let's talk about America today, is clearly by design. How do you defend those who simply say, look, we come here, you're here, and in America, there is the pursuit of happiness, life, and liberty. So you, sir, are dwelling on the negative and dwelling in an area of impossibility as opposed to possibility.
Well, your first statement was right on point. First of all, it was by design. Your Constitution itself boxed black folk in. We've been boxed in by the United States Constitution because the original Constitution spelled out specifically how black folk would be treated in this country. You just mentioned something about we come here searching for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That was not what it was talking about originally in the Constitution. Originally, when Jefferson and Madison wrote the U.S. Constitution, they were talking about life, liberty, and pursuit of property. Because in the Constitution, black folk were defined as property. 3/5 of a human being equal to a field animal, and you were treated as property. There's nothing in the Constitution that addresses the issues for black folk. We are locked and boxed into the Constitution. And until we go back and address that issue, black folk can never get out of it. And you can't get out of it secondarily, out of this box, because the United States Supreme Court put the lock on the box. The United States Supreme Court right now says, let's go back to the original intent of the Constitution, which says black folks should be 3/5 of a human being, property, and equal to a field animal. That's throughout the Constitution. It's never changed. And the United States Supreme Court then, in the Madison and Marlboro decision of 1803, says that we're going to make sure that we abide by that. And then later on in 1857, in the Dred Scott decision, says black folk have no rights that white folks are bound to respect. The Constitution have you locked and boxed, and the United States Supreme Court can make sure you never get out of that box. That is the most racist organization in America. 57 of the first people appointed to the United States Supreme Court were slave owners, and subsequently most of them have been racist. So you're not going to get out of the box unless you go back and address these issues structurally on behalf of black folks.
I like to think that I'm a relatively aware and conscientious individual. I kind of have to be trying to do what I do. But I've read a couple of your highly illuminating, informative books. This one here is Black Labor, White Wealth, The Search for Power and Economic Justice. And you have an appendix in this book that sort of blew my mind as I was reading down it. And that was, it's titled Boundary Safeguards and Restrictions in Southern States. And you mentioned many things, like in 1619, the Maryland segregation policy, which we're right here on the doorstep of Maryland, recommended that blacks be socially included, and so many other things in this particular appendix here. But when I got down to the year 1775, there was something called the Virginia Runaway Law that allowed the sale or execution of slaves attempting to flee slavery. And I thought that I would bring this up in this discussion because oftentimes there are people who say, oh my God, why are you still talking about slavery? And I think that in 2015, there is, for the most part, a wholesale lack of appreciation for the impact that slavery, for the hundreds of years that it was practiced, has on today's world.
Right. And see, black folk are still under the impact of 360 years of slavery and another 100 years of Jim Crow semi-slavery.
I didn't hear the first part you said.
That they're still being burdened. They're overburdened by slavery because no one has addressed the negative impact of slavery on black folk. It's never been addressed. Because what was the purpose of slavery? The purpose of slavery was to systematically, socially engineer black folk into the lowest level of a real-life monopoly game that was based on wealth, power, and control, what you own and control. And slavery itself then maldistributed almost 100% of all this nation's wealth, power, resource, privileges, and controls of all levels of government into the hands of the dominant white society. And black folks don't have enough resources to be a competitive group. When black folk came out of slavery, let's say before they even went into slavery, they owned and controlled nothing. When they came out in the 1860s, a few blacks, about 250,000 black folk, had successfully acquired 1/2 of 1% of this nation's wealth. And that was in 1860, Rock. Here you are 150 years later, black folks still own and control 1/2 of 1% of this nation's wealth. And it's wealth that controls what you get, what your opportunity is going to be. And that 1/2 of 1%, what does it equate to today? That means that the typical white person right now has 3,500 times more wealth than black folk. And we tell black folk to go out and compete with what? What are they going to compete with? They don't own and control anything. They still own and control 1/2 of 1% of anything that value in our society, while they are being burdened down with 6 to 7 times of their fair share of everything that's negative. That all the social pathology is being inflicted on them. They're the ones that are bearing the burdens of low-income housing, poverty, food stamps, welfare, dysfunctional families, no businesses, no opportunities, failing school systems. They're the ones that's being negatively impacted. Nobody has ever addressed the real issues. The civil rights movement didn't address the issues. They started talking about social integration. Social integration was not the problem with black folk, and even the concept of civil rights. They twisted and corrupted that concept. Civil rights was initially talking about what you're going to do for black folk in the country when it came out in 1865 and 1866 in this first civil rights laws. And what those civil rights laws were trying to address was correct the Dred Scott decision of 1857. And what I mean by that black folk had no rights and they could own and control nothing. And so when you had, and here in Washington, D.C., you had some congressmen called radical Republicans like Congressman Benjamin, Thaddeus, and Charles Sumter and the rest of them. They said this, that the only things that black people can ever be in America, they're either going to be free or they're going to be slaves. Minimally, to be free, they must have 40 acres, a mule, and $100. Now, immediately, Andrew Johnson, who replaced Lincoln when he got assassinated, he vetoed it. Yeah. And after he vetoed it, when the conservatives took over the control of black folk, the Northerners walked away from it, left them, abandoned them. Black folk were forced into Jim Crow segregation and peonage. And they corrupted the whole concept of civil rights and made it a civil issue for everybody. Nobody's ever enslaved the gays, the midgets, the humpbacks, women, Asians, Arabs, Hispanic, and American Indians. They enslaved black folk. That's why it's critically important, to go back to one of your earlier questions, for people to understand, when you start talking about issues, about rights, the Dred Scott decision said the black man has no rights. It didn't say the Asian man, the Arab man, the Mexican man, the Indian man. It says the black man. So what's happening now is that the whole concept of civil rights and social integration, all this has been mal-distributed and it's been corrupted into what we call fabricated classes. They're getting all the benefits that black folks should be getting today. All these, and it's intentionally and being designed to make sure everything is moved away from black folk and the lock in the box stays on black folks so they never get out of it.
There are those that would challenge you to say that you discuss about civil rights, because it almost sounds as if you're saying that the struggle of the civil rights movement didn't yield fruit. And one thing that those who challenge you, Lord knows, as we look at, the different people who have addressed some of the things that you've said, is that, for example, the civil rights movement in itself is in large part for Barack Obama sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue today. Do you discount the importance of him, or is it as important as proponents would say it is that he sits there in the White House?
Oh yeah, it's most definitely important in a social context and in a symbolic concept. Very important, because, and unfortunately, that's what black folk have been fed for 150 years, is symbolic achievements, symbolic success. Well, you got a black president, you got Martin Luther King Boulevard, you got Rosa Parks Boulevard, but you didn't touch the structural issue. You did not go back and redistribute some of the resources back into the hands of black folks so they can be a competitive group and a self-sufficient, independent group in America. I mean, what are the benefits, direct benefits, do black get from having, in terms of rectifying the structural problems, by having Obama in the White House, by having, we got 4 or 5 black billionaires like Oprah, Tiger Woods? How does that translate over to black people? If Oprah and Tiger Woods lost all their money tomorrow, how does that disadvantage black folk? It doesn't hurt black folk one way or the other, because there's no connection between Oprah and Tiger Woods being billionaires and helping all these poor black folk, when 38% of all the black people in America are in the poverty level. Having Obama in the White House, how does that translate to benefits for black folk? You write down on a piece of paper, on one side of the paper, all the symbolic issues, then write down how black folk are going to have been benefited. Write down right now what direct, specific sole benefits have gone to black folk by putting Obama in the White House. But so that's important.
You mentioned the word redistribute the wealth.
Right.
And we have a clip, I think we have here about you speaking to the issue and on the issue of reparations. Because to some extent, when you say redistribute the wealth, that I think incorporates some form of reparations. Some form of reparations. So we're going to show that clip and we'll discuss it.
You're going to have all kind of black folk in this country going to be opposed to reparation for you. They're going to be jumping out. They're going to be jumping out. They're going to be jumping out of the woodwork. They're going to be jumping out of the woodwork because they're scared to death. They're just as scared now as they were in 1860. They're going to say, we don't have anything, and when we ask for something, they'll take away what we got, and we don't have anything, but they'll take nothing away from us. And so you're going to have that group that's always scared, and they're always going to say, it's better for us to have nothing than you try to get something, because that way they'll take us back to nothing, which is where we are already.
John Conyers, from his perch there at Capitol Hill, on Capitol Hill, started a long time ago, maybe as forcefully as anyone within the political structure, talking about bills for reparation and the need for reparation. And people yawn and almost say, go away, little boy, with that noise. So I want to talk here today about reparations. When you say that blacks deserve reparations, one, tell me what you mean by that, and take your time and give us, to the extent that you can, a blueprint of what reparations would look like if Dr. Anderson were part of the architecture of that of that structure.
I would be delighted to. Well, first, let's start with the basic premise, is that black folk are exceptional people. They're exceptional people, and they have some exceptionality in this country that everybody overlooks. Black folk have not been treated like all the other people coming to this country. Black folk have been disrespected and disenfranchised in everything and excluded out of everything. Now, let's talk about it in the context of reparations. See, all the immigrants came into this country. They came here looking for some form of benefits. The entire American dream is structured on coming to America to get two things: free land and free labor. That's the basis of the American dream. And we have an unending influx of immigrants in this country going all the way back to 1790 with the first immigration and naturalization law, which set up a ranking order. It set up a ranking order in skin color, running from white, yellow, brown, black, from the highest to the lowest in terms of color, of skin color. And that was the immigration law that was set up based on that. Every immigrant that came to this country was entitled to benefits, to get unearned benefits in terms of the American dream. Everybody talks about the American dream, but nobody ever defines it for you. And every nation was alerted to the fact that America was now open for immigrants to come in. And every immigrant came to this country through the homesteading and through head rights. They could get free land in whatever quantity they want, they could claim. When Thomas Jefferson came, Thomas Jefferson got over 100,000 free acres of land. Thomas Jefferson and Washington, they all got over 100,000. Patrick Henry got over 65,000 acres of free land. They got free land. And when the big land rush came after the end of the Civil War, and we had 26 million Europeans poured in this country. Then they opened up the Oklahoma Territory. White immigrants picked up over 2 million acres of free land in 24 hours. They didn't pay for it. Now that land has been passed on. Let's use that. All that land, all the resources, the timber, the gold, the silver, the chrome, the bauxite, has multiplied in value and doubled in value to triple in value every 20 years. And it's been passed on through inheritance from one white generation to the next. Mm-hmm. So consequently, they have control over the land, the resource, and everything has been passed on from generation to generation and shutting black folk out. That's why the average white person now has $3,500 wealth compared to black folks at 1.5%.
Okay, let me ask you, because you talk about this land, this land that was originally inhabited. Columbus didn't 1492.
Didn't find it, yeah.
Right. Okay. Address, if you would, the role that the U.S. government, this wasn't willy-nilly cowboys, running wild. This was a U.S. government and its policies that ultimately bastardized, took away from, stole from the Native Americans, made treaties that ultimately were broken. If you want to say willy-nilly, that's where willy-nilly came in. So if you would address that for a moment.
Well, yes. It started at one of the first treaties was the New York Treaty about 1516 that came in. That was one of the first treaties. But in every one of those treaties that they set up with the Indians, they put an inclusion in there saying this, that if you were to cooperate with us and be able to help us maintain the slavery system we set up in this country, and we will reward you and compensate you. We'll give you clothing, we'll give you food, we'll give you weapons, and we'll even call you civilized if you will help us maintain slavery. Every treaty contained a clause to help Indians to shut down black folk. Slavery could never have existed in this country and been maintained without the full participation of the American tribes. That's why they started calling them civilized, Rock, because they began to say, you quit hunting in the woods and running wild and get yourself some land and get yourself some slaves. So Indians became slave hunters, slave traders, and in the final analysis, all civilized tribes, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, and Seminole Indians, they all fought with the South to maintain slavery. And so therefore, and they got benefits from it. And that led to going back to the earlier question you asked me about reparations. And even after the Civil War ended, the Choctaw and Chickasaw were still holding about 12 or 15,000 slaves even after the Civil War ended. The United States government sent in troops saying, you got to get rid of this slavery and set black folk free. And they set up what's called the 1866 Indian Treaties with these 5 civilized tribes, which says that black people in this country must not only turn them loose, they must get benefits. They must get forms of reparations. Going back to your earlier question, you must first of all set them free. 2, you must give them an option, and this is for all black freedmen and all blacks who lived in the Indian Territory and all black Indians. You must set them free, allow them to have membership in the tribe. You must give them, let them have access to all the resources on the reservation. You must let them also be tax exempt. You must let them have free education. You must also let them be able to give them $150 in cash. You must give them 160 acres of land. And in present day times, those black Indians under the 1866 treaties should be getting, they could also hold gambling casinos. Now this country has never carried out the full mandates, but yet we're still honoring it for Indians. Right now, all the benefits that Indians are getting in this country are getting it from the 1866 Indian Treaty, because they took up arms against the United States in in the Civil War. They killed off, wiped out all previous treaties. Now, every year in the White House, we get about 560-some white Indian chiefs, which in history they call $5 Indians, because 90% of the people call themselves Indians nowadays are not really Indians. Those are whites passing as Indians because they paid $5 to the Dawes Commission to get their name on the Dawes roll so they can get all these advantages. But every year they get invited to the White House. And every year they got an approximate $3.5 billion every year, even as Obama's been in office. They got money into the Federal Indian Bureau. Now, see, if you were to talk about reparations, black folks have been getting all this money all these years, too. But they got shut out because the Indians in 1938, they sent a letter to the Department of Bureau of Indian Affairs saying, how do we shut black folks down to make sure they never get any reparations? And that letter floated around in the federal government from about 1938 to about 1941. Then it went to the Secretary for the Department of Interior. And the Department of Interior looked and says, aha. Said, how do I come up with a scheme to shut down blacks so they get no reparations in this country? He said, what you do, you Indians come up with a new concept called the quantum blood law, which says that black folk are not entitled to any of the benefits of the 1866 treaties in terms of reparations unless they can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they got 1/4 Indian blood in them. And we make Indian blood sacred like Jesus Christ's blood. And therefore, they've been shutting blacks out all these years. That's why they didn't get any reparations, to go back to your earlier point. And the last point on reparations, you asked me earlier about a blueprint. This country's always given reparations to all groups except black folk, even though black folk were the ones who built the country. They built the bridges, they picked the cotton, they built the highways, they built the government buildings. They were the backbone of this nation. But now, so in the Marshall Plan, we gave billions of dollars to Germans after World War II. We gave under what's called a Point 4 program. We gave reparations to Japanese. We gave reparations to American Indians. We gave reparations to everybody but black folk. Yet black folk are locked into the bottom of a vertical order and a descending order of wealth, owning, and poverty, and control of resources, and nobody wants to address the issue.
As you articulate your position on reparations, redistribution of wealth, again, those looking in, the pundits, if you will, might say, well, are you, a Bernie Sanders acolyte? Are you socialist? Do you propose practicing socialism when you start talking about redistributing the wealth? My question for you is, what do you think it is that has prevented a groundswell behind something that seems as if it's such a logical, practical, and fair idea? Not revolutionary, not radical. When you look at the facts and you look at the history, then it would seem that most fair-minded people might consider this something that they could get behind, put their shoulder to the wheel on. Why do you think there just hasn't been the groundswell even amongst black folks? Most black people don't talk about reparations.
Well, because simply a lot of them don't want to be identified with anything as black. Because right now, see, in this nation, everything that everybody dreams of is identified with and associated with white skin. That means privilege, wealth, power, income, and privileges associated with white skin. Nobody's right mind will identify with anything black that's negative. If black folk are carrying 6 to 7 times their fair share of everything is bad, why would anybody want to identify with blackness when they can identify with whiteness and get all these advantages? Now, in terms of what they should be doing for that, black folk, for instance, right now, these young black folk that need leadership in these communities, like this thing about Black Lives Matter, they're floundering around because they don't have any black leadership out there. Now, black leaders will say, well, what can we do to help these blacks, give them some leadership, and at the same time give them some mild form of reparation that's not violent, not committing themselves to violence, and then to kind of overthrow a revolutionary activities. They just go in all these urban areas. 70% of all the black people in America live in and around 10 large metropolitan areas. Why don't you go in and reindustrialize those areas and build industries in there? But what this country should...
What does that mean?
That means that back in the 1960s, when you started the integration process, see, these urban areas didn't deteriorate because of black folk being there. They deteriorated because at that point in time, to avoid integration, the power structure in this country used the 1952 Highway Act to build expressways out of these urban areas and to build what we call suburbs. Suburbs didn't exist. And once they built those suburbs, they then made a commitment to relocate and all the resources out of those cities, to abandon those cities on what we call a burnt field process, which means let's destroy it. and let the cities deteriorate. They moved to the suburbs. They moved out the industries, the businesses, the wealth, the power, the banks, everything moved to the suburbs. And they abandoned those cities. So that's why those cities deteriorated. You should do just the reverse thing now. Go around and take those big cities like Detroit, Gary, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, where you have heavy concentration of blacks, and you do an industrialization program. What that means, you start awarding incentives. You set up redevelopment banks in those cities, where now the government puts special funds into their revolving loan funds, like at about a 2% interest rate that's revolving and subordinatable to regular loans, where blacks in those cities can start building their own businesses and rebuilding their own communities rather than socially integrating. Stay where you are and build your own communities. And in those communities, started building industries and factories where you can create jobs, an income base, a tax base, wealth base, an employment base, and begin to build functional schools in those communities. And set up these development banks, and the government should put the money into it. Secondly, you should go.
Let me stop you there. And Joe Sixpack, driving into work at one of the factories in Detroit from the suburbs. Where he still lives. Joe Sixpack, the white guy.
Yeah.
He's going to say, well, wait a minute. My tax dollars, in order to do what you're talking about and redistribute some of this wealth, my tax dollars, my hard-earned tax dollars, are going to have to be touched. And I'm not looking to make that happen.
Well, that's good. It should be touched. You know why? He came here. His ancestors came here to get free handouts. That's why they came here. No immigrant spent 3 months crossing perilous oceans to get to the United States looking for happiness. They came here to get handouts, to get free benefits. See, understand this, Rock, and I want your audience to understand it too. 99% of all the black people in America are the direct descendants of slaves, which means they were here before 99% of all the other people arrived. All these people are coming to this country boasting about, my family came from Germany, my parents came from Ireland, my parents came from Greece or Italy. They came here for a specific reason, to get benefits. They get unearned benefits, to profit and enjoy the fruits of black folks' labor and the Indian land. They've already gotten theirs. And now what they're saying is that now that we've gotten everything, we got control of it, we got it free and passed it from generation to next generation, we're not going to let you have anything. And see, that's grossly unfair and it's immoral. And the worst thing that our society is doing, and they should cease in doing it, is they start equating black folk to all these fabricated groups, like minorities and poor folk and people of color and Asians and Hispanics coming into the country. These people coming to this country today get unearned benefits to enjoy the fruit.
Okay, there you have it. How about that? Now, we're going back down into Claude Anderson's book here, and I want you to really, really think about this piece of work right here. I'm on page 3 here. It says, the first Thanksgiving, okay? Because now in September, what we got, a Memorial Day, a Labor Day, there's one of them coming up. I don't participate in any of them. However, it stays here. The first Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is the holiday on which we thank God for his bounty and blessings. Thanksgiving, with its displays of pumpkins and pilgrims, is one way Americans proclaim their love of country. Yet, the true origin of Thanksgiving and its celebration reveal an unsettling combination of myths and facts. First, pilgrims did not introduce the tradition. American Indians had observed autumn harvest celebrations for centuries before the first Europeans arrived on the continent. Second, although George Washington set aside days for national Thanksgivings, it was President Abraham Lincoln who proclaimed the day a national holiday back in 1863. Ironically, this was the same year he issued his historic Emancipation Proclamation, which symbolically, at least, freed more than 5 million black people from slavery. Although the first official November Thanksgiving was the first holiday that all black people in America were able to give back for being free from the chains of servitude, no public connection was made between the two events. Lincoln did not make any religious connections to the Thanksgiving holiday. His motives were purely nationalistic. Having divided the nation over the slavery issue and the ensuing of civil war, Lincoln felt the Union needed all the patriotic fervor that such a holiday observance could engender. While black people were the primary justification for proclaiming a national Thanksgiving holiday, no symbolic forms of blackness have ever been associated with the holiday. And not until after 1890 were American Indians included in the tradition. Moreover, no one used the term pilgrim until the late 1870s. Probably the only truth about Thanksgiving, as it is commonly practiced, is that it started off as a homage to patriotism and has remained as such until this day. Okay? So there you have it. That is the information in regards to Thanksgiving. You know, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out now, where did the turkey come in at? How did the turkey and the what's the other stuff? Cranberry sauce. How did all that get in there? Amazing. Social imitation of whites, putting on airs, dressing up, and immaculating white high society. Northern slaves, especially those in New England, were more interested in putting on political airs and mimicking the pomp of government. This was true despite the fact that neither slaves nor free blacks could hold elected office until after the close of the 19th century. The prohibition did not stop them from enjoying the trappings of power. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, slaves in a number of New England cities and towns initiated Negro Election Day, an annual event at which slave communities elected their own governors, judges, sheriffs, and magistrates. These elected positions gave those who held them more status within the black community. But the black leaders did not exercise official political power and could do little to help their people. Occasionally, they were able to unofficially represent the interests of blacks in periods of conflicts or controversy. Noting the importance that blacks placed on status and title, whites often ridiculed those who imitated white politics by giving them ridiculous titles such as governor, mayor, and your honor. As mocking as these titles were, in most instances, they stuck and were accepted as their personal name. Amazing. We're going to take a little quick break, and we will be right back. Y'all hold on a minute.
Just blaze, make it knock.
me make sure I got this one right also. Someone tells you that you must pay them money about your children in the form of child support. They also say they would suspend your driver's license. And they said they would garnish your wages. Who were they talking to? A debtor? Or did they make the mistake and say it to a creditor? When you got married, they said it was a part of that also. Request my free report at tarhakadebtelimination.org. That's tarhakadebtelimination.org. Let's have some fun. Fill out the contact us form for my free report, and I'll rush it straight to your email box. What about this banking stuff? What's going on in the United States? I tell you what, request my free report at tarhakadebtelimination.org. Peace.
Okay, we back. Now, right here on page 6, in Dirty Little Secrets, Dr. Claude Anderson, first ministers were licensed to control. Did you hear that? The first ministers in this country were licensed to control. It states the following: the American War for Independence gave blacks, both free and enslaved, cause to express their interest in religious freedom. But fearing blacks would use the Bible to seek freedom, education, or black unity, whites applied strict limits to black religious services, while a few blacks, mostly housed as opposed to field slaves, were allowed to attend services with whites. They were required to sit in separate all-black sections. Once white slave owners realized that religion could serve as an excellent mechanism to control slaves, they allowed field blacks to attend services as long as they were accompanied by a white overseer, because owners did not want black field hands in their own churches. They built modest chapels for them on their plantations. By the latter part of the 18th century, whites in many slave states decided to allow blacks to build their own churches and conduct their own religious services. This change of heart may have been motivated in part by a sincere desire to encourage the Christianization of blacks, but the relentless push for increased control was never far from the surface. In response to independent services conducted by and for blacks, as a national policy evolved requiring whites to select a licensed all-black preachers. Dominant white society controlled black religion, its ministers and churches. Catechisms for religious instruction of slaves commonly boast such as passages as, "Who gave you a master and a mistress? God gave them to me. Who said that you must obey them? God said that I must." A black congregation had the political potential of being a source of unrest to slave owners, allowed only the most pliable, compromising, and controllable blacks to become licensed as the ministerial head of black congregations. The licensed black ministers was expected to encourage their fellow blacks to be meek, obedient, and accepting of whites as masters. In this arrangement, blacks were to remain loyal to whites, and worldly gratification was postponed until after death. The licensed black preachers were supposed to defer to secular authorities or political matters and avoid comments on the injustice blacks suffered. Since blacks could not develop businesses nor enter the professional ranks, the ministry became a business as well as a job. Black ministers began cropping up across the nation. Unlike in white communities, they became instant leaders, popularly respected, and income security came with the position. There were no educational requirements. only a social obligation to support the status quo between the races. It was not difficult to find blacks in every community and plantation willing to accept the prescribed leadership role for a preacher. In 1783, for instance, Jesse Peters became one of the first blacks to receive a preaching license. He was appointed to lead America's first Negro Baptist church, located in Silver Bluff, South Carolina. Joseph Willis was the first to deliver a Protestant sermon west of the Mississippi River, where the budding minister also moderated the first statewide Baptist organization, the Louisiana Association. Black churches are now the oldest black business in America and one of the few to survive integration. So, there you have it. So the next time somebody approaches you to try to get you to go to church, remember that, what I just told you. Remember what it is, where it came from. Okay. When somebody come up and you say, well, God told me, well, God put it on my, no, and I ain't trying to hear none of that. Okay. All right, we're going down into our next heavyweight. Y'all hold your hat, and we want to listen to what this sister has to say. Y'all hold on a minute.
My position is that the black woman's disrespect and rebellion against the leadership and the authority of the black man is a direct cause of the breakdown in our black family structures. Now, of course, there are many black people who consider those fighting words, because as black women, we have never been subject to the kind of examination that our men have been subject to since we have been here. We have been somewhat protected and shielded from any kind of critiquing about our personal behavior, whereas our men have always been up for examination. The book is not an attack on black women. I have never said that all black women do everything that I list in my book. None of us have lived long enough to do everything that I list in the book, but most of us do some of the things that I've listed in my book. And I do say that it is not because of generalizations that we are all victimized by some of the negative patterns of behavior in the book, but the book just represents our collective contribution. This is some of everything that we have done, or that we do daily, that contributes to the breakup of our relationships, the destruction of our man, and the failure of our children to be able to function. They did not tell us that all of that, being my own person and I'm independent, would lead to separation, loneliness, celibacy, and lesbianism. They didn't tell us that if you give up the man, you're going to take one of these things and it's worse and it will destroy your nation. They didn't give us that information. They made us think that it was some kind of glorified position to brag about the fact that I got my own job, my own credit card, my own car, so I don't need no man. I don't even know how we got that mixed up. Ain't none of that got nothing to do with being with no man. We have some serious relationship problems that nobody has been able to address us on because everybody wants to pretend that this is not going on. Over 60% of our women are single, widowed, separated, or divorced. They don't have a man. I just came out of Florida and they got a housing complex that the Urban League built, which is a black organization that is for women and children only. They say they don't allow any men in there. I didn't have time to deal with it, but I talked about them real bad. That's the silliest program I've ever heard of. You know them women that had men if they got a bunch of children. They need fathers. They need protection. We hear about the drug problem that we have in our projects across the country. It's one of the major places that we have a drug problem. We talk about the great strength that we have as black women. Well, the welfare department don't rent government apartments to single black men. Those apartments belong to black women who are allowing this to go on in their home. We have not looked at what part of the responsibility do we share. Yes, black men sell a lot of drugs, and a lot of us black women get the money from them drugs and buy some of these fancy clothes we wear. Drive around in some of these fancy cars. He is not doing these things alone and without support from us, whether they are good or bad. See, we have a lot of power. We are very strong women. I'm saying that we're using our strength in the wrong direction. We're using it to tear our man down, tear our nation down instead of building it up. Having an education and a job does not necessarily mean you have a successful life. I keep telling black women that to raise a child, they say, well, I provided with food, clothing, and shelter. That's not raising a child, that's maintaining one. To raise a child, you need a parental coalition of a man and a woman. We have sons who, by not having a father in the home, they don't know how to respect women. They take on the black feminine female emotionalism. They're doubtful. They're indecisive. They can't make a decision. They don't know what to do about being a man because we can't teach them that. We don't have that knowledge. We have daughters who grow up in a home where they don't see any affection, where there's no man there. They go out into the world and try to mate. They don't have no idea how to be no woman to no man, how to function in a house with a man, because they haven't seen it. Most of our children, just like us, get all the information we have about how you be with a mate off television. It's the only medium that shows us anybody being together. Those rules have not worked for us. The white woman's liberation movement, we don't have anything to do with that. We have not been under the control of the black man for over 500 years, so what do we have to get liberated from them from? They haven't been our boss. That's the white woman and her man. They're going through that, and that's their business. We don't have any business being in that. They only introduced it to break down the civil rights movement. Civil rights movement started with the black man, the black woman, and the black child standing together, trying to plead for freedom, justice, and equality, and more benefits in the country that they had built. They threw the white woman in there with the women's liberation movement and made it a woman against man thing. That created a big separation between black men and black women, because then everybody started going for self. Then they bring the welfare system in and tell us in order to feed and clothe and house our children, we have to give up our man. You have to put the man out of the house. When the white farm wife goes to the government for subsidy for the farm, they don't tell her to get rid of the farmer. They keep that family together. But in the black community, they make it a requirement, because they want to keep endorsing into the black community that the black man is no good, and that he is not deserving of respect, he is not deserving of us letting him give us any protection or instruction, and that we are better than them. The major responsibilities that the black woman has had on the earth for the trillions of years that we have been here has been one of nutrition and birthing children. Those two things have a great deal to do with the survival of any people, the reproduction of the nation, and feeding them the proper food so that they can live. Those are very important jobs. Those are very powerful positions, because it puts us in a position to decide who's going to live or die, and how slow they're going to die, by what we feed them. We have a very powerful position. That's not a small role that we play. We have just been taught to misrepresent and misuse that power. The people who we have been counting on to give us the truth about how to get along have failed. The white people don't know how to get along. They don't have that information themselves. They don't get along with nobody on earth. So they don't have no information to impart to us about how we're supposed to get along. They change their relationship rules at will. We have, tons of black children around this country that I hear from who have grown up traumatized by the fact that they were referred to as the outside child. When we were having children like that, they called it illegitimate children, until the white woman started having them, and now it's single parenting. They changed the rules according to what they're doing. So I've called on our people to change them depending on what we want to do, what our needs are. There's another need that has not been addressed in our community, because nobody will deal with it, and that's one that God did not create three sexes. We only have men and women. Now, I have not said that we should reject the sisters who try and act like men and the men who try and act like women. I'm not saying to reject them from among us, but they need to be taught. We don't have to accept that as some kind of normalcy, because that's not normal. I'm trying to demonstrate how they have set rules that they have forced us to follow that they don't even follow themselves. They change the rules to suit them when they get ready. We can change them to suit us when we get ready, especially if we have what we have now, which is a failing system. It hasn't worked for us. We don't have to be ashamed that it hasn't worked for us. But we do have to be ashamed of the fact that we keep plodding behind it and not trying to make the corrections that will help our people to survive. To keep us in this condition. He wants to keep us separated from our land. Because he knows that the only door, the only route he has to destroy our black man is through the black woman. Doesn't matter what the woman's education or background is. In fact, we have proven that the more education we get, the more ignorant we get in front of our neighbors. We represent the missing link as black women. The black man has been dissected, examined, the white man, the white woman, and the black child. But it has been us as black women who have never been examined. We have been protected. We have been insulated. We have been kept from any kind of criticism about our personal behavior in the home and outside of the home. And we have been given the false compliment that we are the backbone of the black nation. There is no doubt in any community in this country that the men in those communities are the backbone of their nation. There is no doubt in the white community that the white man is the backbone of his nation. The European, the Buddhist, the Korean, the Japanese, the Hispanic, all of those men are the backbones of their community, and there's no doubt about it. It is only in the black community where those values have been transposed and where they put that burden on us and tell us that we are the backbone of the black community, which is a direct insult to the black man and implies that he don't have no backbone and that his women have to represent him. I remind people all the time that God did not make the white man, the white woman, the black woman, and then the black man. He made the black man first, and he created all of the rest of the people after him. In 1985, I was going about the country trying to still work to teach our people something, trying to get them to stop eating pork. And at that time, I was having what I call get off those hog lectures. And I would take the microscope out, and I would show black people how even if you cook pork, you couldn't kill the worm. I would show them that the worm was still alive in the meat after heat, because that's what they told us, that you could cook it and kill the worm. And so I would show them what it did to the brain and the spinal column. And so there were many black men who wanted to stop eating pork. They wanted to change their diet, and they were in agreement. But it was the black woman who I found who was the most adamant, who refused to change her cooking habits, who didn't want to shop differently, who didn't want to do any different meal planning. And so I say, well now, if we are refusing to provide the black man with the proper physical food when we know food is what sustains life, then what else are we keeping from him?
All right, we're back, ladies and gentlemen. I'll hold on a minute. I'm going to another quick commercial break. Hold on.
If it is against the law for the bank to loan out depositors' money to you, how could the bank give you a loan? And if that's the case, how are they able to keep their doors open? And in some cities, they have the biggest buildings in town. What happens to the person who deposits money in the bank? What do they receive outside of nickels and dimes in the form of what's called interest? How can you get paid? Go to TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Fill out the Contact Us form, and I'll rush you my free report. Let's get down to the bottom of this situation. Let me show you how what's going on in how to deal with it. Okay, TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Peace, y'all.
Okay, we back. Now, before we bring in another heavyweight, I'm going to give you some more information from our Dirty Little Secrets by Dr. Claude Anderson from page 10 this time. The first cowboys, okay? The first cowboys in America. Contrary to the images created by Hollywood, black slaves were America's first authentic cowboys. The word cowboy, in fact, originally had nothing to do with roping cattle and hell raising in the high plains. The word cowboy grew out of social customs that did not allow black males to be addressed as Mr. or men, especially gentlemen, or any other title that conveyed status. 50 years before there was an American Southwest cowboy, with the diminutive term boy was often applied to black slaves in the Southeast who worked at cow pens. Their job was to herd livestock in Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina. The label boy was a constant derogatory term for a black male that included not only cowboy, but houseboy, field boy, stable boy, and underboy, personal body servant during the Civil War. After the Civil War, new land rush laws sparked the westward movement. 15 million new European immigrants arrived in the latter part of the 1800s. But the ranching and cattle industry of the Southwest, especially along the Texas Gulf Coast, was wholly dependent on black labor. Many of the slaves served as cowboys before they were freed. Nearly one-third of the 35,000 cowboys who drove cattle north from Texas between 1866 and 1895 were black. Many of these black cowboys distinguished themselves in the cattle towns of the Old West. Some of their achievements were a credit to their race. Others were not. In Dodge City, for instance, the first man shot was a black cowboy named Tex, an innocent bystander to a gun battle. The first man ever to be arrested by authorities in Abilene, Texas, was an unknown black man. His black friends were so outraged by his arrest for what they felt was a trivial matter that they shot up the town and used the ensuing confusion as a cover stage, a jailbreak for their friend. Nat Love was another black cowboy with questionable character, widely known as Deadwood Dick. Love was said to have ridden with Billy the Kid, Jesse and Frank James, the Buffalo Bill. Cherokee Bill, another black cowboy, was similar to Billy the Kid in everything but skin color, according to one historian. Not all black cowboys lived the kind of dangerous short lives in the Old West that is the Hollywood stereotype. Thousands of black cowboys were lawmen, popular heroes, buffalo soldiers, or just plain ranchers and farmers. Yet only a few black cowboys, good or bad, can be found in the history books. How about that? All right. All right, let's go on down in here and bring in another heavyweight. Okay? Hold your hat.
Good evening. Some time ago, we did a two-part series on the black child and discussed, among other topics, psychomotor development and the effects of racism on the black child. This evening, we return to the subject in the interest of thoroughness with Mr. Amos Wilson, author of The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child. Mr. Wilson, first this question. Why, quote, psychology of the black child, end quote?
Because in a sentence we can say that psychologies that are currently available for dealing with black children do not really meet the needs of black children, nor black people as a whole. Psychology, like many other disciplines, it's based upon the history and experience of a people. The psychology that's available to black people, that is used for teaching black people, for a whole host of things we use psychology for in this culture, is really European psychology and is based upon the European experience. And to try to transfer that psychology to black people, to try to explain the black psyche in terms of a psychology that's not related to the history and experience of black people, is really to misuse that psychology and to mislead black people.
But aren't we all one people? Aren't we?
We are to a degree, but I often use a paradox when this kind of question is asked. I say that we are different because we are so much alike. All of us are alike in that we use learning as a means of coping with our environment. And in that sense, black people learn as white people learn, such. So we are the same in that we use the instrument of learning as a coping tool. However, what we learn is what makes our behaviors different. So then we can say, in the long run, in terms of the historical experience of black people, what have black people learned? And looking at that learning experience, we must say then that their behavior is related to that experience. And the thing we recognize immediately is that the black learning experience is not the European learning experience.
What do you mean there?
And I sort of like to look at it in terms of, first in terms of individual psychology. For instance, if you did a psychological profile of me, that profile would have to look into my own personal experience, my own personal history. You could not use that profile for yourself. It would not fit you. I could not explain your behavior in terms of my experience as such, because your behavior and your experience, of course, is unique. Therefore, the European experience is a unique experience. The psychology of Europeans is based on that experience, and consequently, it cannot be used for our people. We have to look in the history of African people for the psychology of African people. So then the psychology is, for instance, take educational psychology. To a great extent, that psychology is built around the white middle-class child. But if you take that psychology and go into the majority of schools in our urban areas, you don't find a white middle-class child there. So you have a teacher who perhaps has been educated in terms of that psychology, running into children or having to deal with a classroom of children. And the child she's been taught to deal with is not even in the classroom to begin with. So, of course, this creates a great disparity in what she's learned, what she has, or he expects to go on in the classroom, and what actually occurs, which leads to a good deal of confusion. The other aspect of why we need a black psychology involves the fact that Eurocentric psychology is a part of the Eurocentric and European oppressive mechanism. It is one of the major means by which the European has maintained his domination and subjugation of black people. It is a psychology that has developed to a great extent out of the European colonial experience and still carries those roots. And as a matter of fact, even in this day and age, European psychology is used to manipulate black people, to maintain them in a position of subjugation and so forth. So we have to develop a psychology, a black psychology, that must countermand and counteract this kind of influence of Eurocentric psychology.
How is European psychology used to manipulate and dominate black people?
There are any number of ways that it's used. First of all, it's used to maintain an image of black people, both in Europeans themselves and of black people themselves, the so-called famous inferiority complex. To a great extent, Eurocentric psychology has been used to justify basic white prejudices. So the average white person in the racist American society thinks of blacks, let's say, as so-called innately inferior, say, intellectually. Along comes then their psychology with the so-called sheen of being scientific, to justify what is already a common myth. So to that extent, it supports a racist system that exists in the society. As a matter of fact, not only does it do that, it provides various number of categories and labels that are used by the layman as well as by professionals to prevent black children in many ways from gaining positive
What are these labels?
things. Many of the labels, labels such as learning disabled, those labels that we hear a lot about nowadays, hyperactivity, reading disabilities, language deficiencies. As a matter of fact, to a great extent, when you are in a university or college and you go to a course that supposedly deals with the minority child, so-called, it really becomes, to a great extent, a course on labels, you see, disadvantaged children, this kind of thing, culturally deprived children. So what happens quite often, the teacher leaves that kind of course with a series of negative labels so that when that teacher perhaps enters into a classroom, these labels are placed on the children, which lowers her expectation or his expectation about these children and provides a ready excuse for not teaching, you see. It, in a sense, this labeling business has left the teacher free now to excuse himself or herself from really teaching, because you can immediately make an excuse. Well, this child is not learning because it's from a disadvantaged neighborhood, or it's from a deprived culture, or it may have a minimal brain damage, or it's hyperactive, and therefore, why bother?
I want to go back into your book a little bit, and we'll leave that and go to some other things. But in your book, you mentioned that many people make the mistake of looking at the black child as a white child that's painted black. Would you expound on that some, please?
Yes, that's a common mistake that we find. And in fact, it's sort of a myth that's used to justify a lot of so-called civil rights movements and integrationist movements. And it's been sort of a convenient fiction. However, sometimes it works against our own interest. And that is of seeing the black child merely as a colored child. You know, it's just a white child except the fact that it has a little different color as such. And underneath the color, everything else is the same. But I object to that because color is not merely just a shade on the body. What your color is represents the history and experience of your people. We are the color we are because of the long evolutionary experience of black people in Africa as a result of black people adjusting to the African continent. It relates also to the concept of genes. You see, what our color, of course, comes from our genes, but we cannot think of genes merely as little chemical packets that color your skin and color your hair and give your body shape and forms. The genes are, in a way, a miniature abstraction of the history and experience of one's people, the cultural experience as well as the biological experience of one's people. So then what color represents on the surface is really the history and experience of black people. You see, so whatever biological decisions our people made, biological adjustments they made to the African continent and so forth is represented in our bodies.
Okay. In our first series, you talked about psychomotor development and the black child. Would you briefly summarize this area?
This again goes back to what I talk about as the African experience, the African evolutionary experience. Sometimes we overlook some very basic ideas. And one of the basic ideas revolves around the question, when you look at the European climate and the European vegetation and its climatic history, and then you compare that, say, to the African climate history, the African geography and vegetational systems and so forth, you are faced with the issue then, why is it that the black body should be a duplicate of the European body? When, if we look at it from a biological point of view, the nature seeks to adjust a body to its geographical surrounds. And the geographical surrounds of the black man in Africa is quite significantly different from that of the European. So in light of that, we should expect that that body, the African body, should not be a duplicate of the European body as such. So consequently, in order to understand the African body, we must then look at the African evolutionary experience as such. When you look at it that way, then you begin to recognize that there are very significant differences in the rates of development of black, say, and European children. For instance, many of the charts we use in this country and other countries are charts based upon the developmental rates and orientation of Europeans. When we look at the African charts, though, we see rates that are so significantly different until, for instance, after a study of black American children by the American Academy of Pediatrics, it was found that their differences were such, that is, the differences between the development of black children and white children, that a different nutritional chart and a different nutritional approach to black children should be used. For instance, the black child does things on the very first day of birth, such as the ability to hold its head up. If you would pull it up into a sitting position, it is able to actually hold its head up. Black children are able to do this basically, say, 9 hours after being born or on the very first day. The European child reaches this milestone a month and a half later. Black children, for instance, can firmly move their heads about and deal with the environment or maintain a social relationship with their caretaker or with an examiner on the first 2 days after birth. The European child takes about 2 months to reach this point. There are things black children are doing at, say, 7 weeks that the European child reaches some 20 weeks later. It even gets broader than that. For instance, if a black child at 5 months can coordinate himself so that he can, say, take a form out of a form board, it will take the European child some 6 months to get to that same milestone. Or walking the stairs alone. A black child is doing that, many of them at 7 months. The European child then is going to take another 3 or 4 months sometimes to get to that same point. As a matter of fact, some of the developmental scales that are used to measure children's rates of growth include some 60 different items. And on all 60 of those items, the black child comes out significantly ahead in psychomotor development. And remember, I'm emphasizing psychomotor development here, not just motor development. We're also speaking in terms of those things that are mental as well. So then it would indicate then both on a physical level, as far as the rates of body growth and so forth, as well as on a psychological level, the black child is significantly in advance of its European counterpart. To add on another aspect of this, because sometimes the European psychologist concedes this growth and development of the black child, and it's put under the caption of motoric advancement or motoric superiority of the black child, as if it has nothing a little.
He's a good athlete.
Yeah, right. It has nothing to do with the mind. But you know, now we are developing a different type of so-called intelligence test that doesn't deal with pencil and paper and is far less so-called culturally oriented. We are now developing tests with the computers wherein we can actually attach electrodes to the brain and challenge that child's, say, vision, hearing in response to things going on in the environment, and get a readout of its brainwave activities as to how it is processing that information, how it is responding to those stimuli that are occurring in the environment. And here we find, and it's interesting at this point to note that Jensen himself notes this in his famous treatise that degraded black people to a good extent, that the brainwave patterns of black children shows a significant advance in terms of maturity over that of white children, which means then that even at birth, not only are they motorically in advance. But in terms of their ability to process information and handle information, they're also in advance. And this is seen, too, in the earlier accomplishment in the language area. Black children, of course, are talking earlier, as well as walking earlier, as well as established in what we call social relations earlier, and so forth. So you see, this somehow must be related to the African experience of people. And you can see the tremendous damage that can be done if you use, for instance, the white middle-class child as a model for measuring black children, or use what is adequate to meet their nutritional needs as being adequate to meet the needs of black children. And this is why that myth of the black child being a white child colored black becomes ultimately damaging to black children, because you're faced with the issue then, in a sense, in terms of the advancement of black children, using a standard of the European child. May not be possible that we may be retarding the growth and development of that child? When we talk about the readiness of a child to learn, and you look at the European child, may we not be missing out on the readiness of our own children because we're not looking at those children in terms of their actual ancestry and background? So there are many implications.
And I guess all this ties back into the need for a psychology.
Definitely.
The black child.
Definitely. A need, and based on that black experience, because it becomes obvious in terms of its physiological and psychological growth and development, you are not talking about the same children at all.
I went to a college a couple of days ago, and it just so happened that, I'm serious about this, when I approached the desk, there was a developmental psychology book on that desk, and I looked through that book, and there was nothing on the black child. And I'm talking about at a black institution. Why is that? Why does that exist?
For a number of reasons. One of the reasons, I think, and an overall reason, is that these psychologies, you see, just by the title of them, are called developmental psychology. And that deceives many people into thinking then that this is a psychology that has equal applicability across board. And unfortunately, many black schools and black scholars operate under this illusion. One of the things that we don't, as black people, I think we are not conscious enough of, is how white disciplines, not only psychology but sociology, all are part and parcel, really a part of the process of maintaining the subjugation of black people. And I don't think we are aware to the degree that we should be that when we're engaged in standard American education, we are actually engaged in what are called European studies or white studies. We have a lot of people who went off, you know, in the 60s, and we demanded black studies as if we were demanding something ethnic, as if what had been offered in America and what's being offered in American universities is non-ethnic and objective and across the board. And therefore, the European then doesn't call his courses the psychology of the white child or the sociology from the European perspective or white economics, but this is exactly what it is. And therefore, you have in many black schools then this idea that simply because it is not overtly labeled white or European, that it is not therefore white or European in origin. And to a great extent, these psychologies are exactly what they should be, in a sense. They are there to maintain the position of Europeans as such. The European, in a sense, protects his own interest by not really talking about the black child in any truthful light and presenting the black child in a different sort of light. The ultimate outcome of studies, even in black schools, ultimately is to maintain the European in a superior position as such.
What do you think would be gained if the black population worldwide were to become more knowledgeable about the black child's psychomotor development, etc.? What would you think the benefit would be?
I think the benefit would be, and that would be not just a benefit, but the many benefits would be, first of all, turning over the world situation as it is today. I think it's basically an insult to the intelligence and to the man and womanhood of black people, and I may say of non-white people, that we have a minority in the world that is dominating that world. We have to forget that the European is really a minority in the world. It's not a majority. We are so used to in this country of thinking of ourselves as minorities, and we have to forget that we are part of a very large majority in the world. In fact, I heard someone project that the European segment of the world population would be something like 10% in the 1990s. At this point, I think it's around 20% now, which means that we have then from 10 to 20% of the world population literally ruling over and dominating the other 80%. The other thing...
What's wrong with that?
The other thing, yes.
What's wrong with that?
There are many things wrong with it. Part of the thing is, of course, is the fact that we as non-white people supply these countries with the wealth that are under our lands. And the amazing paradox is, in a sense, that the richer our lands are, our African lands, if you mention even the Asian one, the South American one, the poorer quite often the people are who are above them. And then we have this image then of non-white people as being poor, as poverty-stricken, and you have the shame of people literally starving to death while their soils supply the riches and wealth that maintains essentially a resourceless Europe. So just the idea of enjoying more of our own wealth and the wealth of our land is enough to develop a psychology, not only a psychology, but really a whole host of disciplines, a sociology and economics that will reverse this kind of situation where the majority of the world's people that also own the actual majority of the world's natural wealth should benefit from that wealth as such. The other thing is, of course, that we have assumed, unfortunately, that somehow what is European represents normality, represents the way that the world should go, represents the only way of what we call development. And unfortunately, I don't think we've examined European psychology. Paradoxically, European psychology is not contained in psychology books. It's essentially contained in history. And what do we see?
Say that again.
The psychology of Europeans are essentially contained in history, not in psychology books, because it's a psychology that you see acted out on the world stage. And what is the result of that psychology? What is the result of the, say, dominant position of the European in the world? It is bought at a tremendous cost to non-white people. For instance, you can ask the question, is there any country where the Europeans stepped that the local people were not degraded in some sort of way, that the local people were not exploited in some sort of way, that in many instances such as this country or in South America where the local populations were not literally and physically destroyed as such? When we look at even, so in the historical sense, you see, we are dealing here with a people in terms of their actions, to me, that are not commendable in terms of what we should be seeking as a people. I look into the future and I see then non-white people coming back on the world stage and ruling that world stage, taking their rightful place in the power relations of the world. Will those non-white people be colored Europeans? Will then they set up a world, too, that depends upon the degradation of other people and upon the subjugation of other people? Will they, too, establish a racist ideology? Or will their world be a different one based on a whole different set of principles?
Do you think it will be?
It depends upon what choices we make as people. It depends, again, upon looking at their psychology, understanding the results of their psychology, critically analyzing the European psyche, then looking at our own and making some very critical choices. If, for instance, though, we choose, as unfortunately has been chosen by many of our people, equality as our goal, this kind of thing that we want to be the same as the European. We don't want to be any different. As a matter of fact, we want to be so much alike we don't even want people to notice our color. You say we want to remove the color line and forget that we are black or forget that we are Asian or what have you. Now then I think about that and said, well, what is this world really like? If we are on the brink now of world suicide, we're on a situation, as I just mentioned, where a small percentage of the world lives fat and well off of a large majority of the world that lives in degradation and so forth. Are we saying that when we want to be the same as the European, are we saying in a sense then what we want to do is just multiply what the European already has? We want to share in. And I think this is a crucial issue for, say, the black American when he makes that kind of statement. Does it mean that we want to join IBM or the other companies so that we can equally exploit Africans and equally exploit third world nations? I don't think when we look at it that we would choose sameness or being just like them. And I don't think once we look at the effects of the European ideologies and psychologies on non-white people that we will choose those as being adequate for our future goal. In fact, I think the choice of equality with whites is a very low-level goal for black people. I think because, of course, when we look at this world today, we're almost on the brink now of where the white man is ready to destroy the whole of the earth, where he seems to be unable to restrain himself.
Okay, we'll have to come back next week for part 2. Mr. Amos Wilson, thank you very much. That's our program. Please join us next week. Good evening.
All right, everybody. We're back. That was Brother Amos Wilson, a heavyweight. And I want to go back over here to Claude, but and this is very, very important for us to understand because I know doggone well we ain't never been taught this in no college or school or university. The first horse racing jockeys were black. Okay, this is page 12, Dirty Little Secret. This is stuff we should have been told. From the early days of horse racing until the early 20th century, most of the handlers, trainers, breeders, groomers, and jockeys were black slaves. Black jockeys dominated the racing industry throughout the 19th century. Blacks were responsible for the daily care of livestock on farms and plantations. They performed similar duties in city carriage houses and racetrack stables. It was a natural step for blacks to move from caring and grooming horses to riding and racing them. In the first Kentucky Derby, 14 of the 15 jockeys were black. In that race, a black jockey, Olive Lewis, rode Aristide, the winning horse. Isaac Ike Murphy, born a slave in Lexington, Kentucky in 1861, was considered by some the greatest jockey of the 19th century. Murphy's mother did laundry for a racing stable, and in his early years he exercised horses for stables in the area. Because most jockeys of the time were black, it was not difficult for Murphy to enter the profession. He rode his first race at age 14. During his 20-year career, Murphy raced 1,412 times, winning 628 times. Racing in the Saratoga, New York circuit in 1862, he won 49 of his 51 races. Murphy won his first Kentucky Derby in 1884, repeating his feat in 1890 and in 1891. 5 years later, at the age of 35, he died of pneumonia. After his death, Murphy was included in the Hall of Fame of two racetracks, Pimlico, Maryland, and Saratoga, Florida. Isaac Murphy, Jimmy Lee, and Oliver Lewis established track records at the Kentucky and American Derbies until their record still stands today. Why wasn't I never told that? Isn't that something? You hold on a minute. We'll be right back.
When it comes to relationships between debtors and creditors, what's the difference? Have you ever seen a debtor try to function in the private? Let me tell you, it's a sight to see. It's like the man who found out I hadn't eaten any meat in 8 months. He rushed up to me and told me he found out I hadn't eaten any meat in 8 months and that I better eat something quick before it's too late. Get out of the public and into the private. Get my free report by filling out the Contact Us form at TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. When you fill out that Contact Us form, I'll rush you my free report straight to your email box. And that way you'll be able to contact me and we can work on getting you out of the public and into the private. Okay? TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Peace.
Okay, we're back. Now, we're still in Dr. Claude Anderson's book on page 12, Dirty Little Secrets, The Last Derby Jockey. That's what he said. Guess Long Shot Conley, who earned his nickname by riding numerous underdogs to victory in 1890, was the last black jockey to ride in the Kentucky Derby, riding Colston in 1911. Long Shot Connolly finished third in the Kentucky Derby, the last major racing event to permit black jockeys. When big business entered the sport, blacks saw their role reduced to non-riding menial jobs. During the first decade of the 20th century, whites and Latinos replaced blacks in the racing industry. One of the few relics that remain as a testament to black involvement in professional racing are the rare lawn jockeys that guard suburban driveways. I know y'all have seen that little statue. We got one around the corner on the north side to a friend of mine house to sit right out there. Some students of black history believe these icons evolved not from the black jockey era, but from the image of loyal slave coach footman, steadfastly holding his master's lantern. Lighting the lanterns was a way to signal other slaveholders that a slave had run away. Ironically, the lawn jockey began to disappear from driveways about the same time blacks was disappearing from the racetrack circuits. Okay? All right. I just want to put that little bit of information out there for you. And don't forget, the title of the book is Dirty Little Secrets About Black History, Heroes, and Other Troublemakers. And we're going to come back to that. But now, let's delve on down here and bring in our next heavyweight here. Okay? Oh, you have.
It's good to see you again. You've been busy, haven't you?
Oh, yes.
You've been thither and yon, and the last time we spoke, you were talking about Africa, going back to Africa, and tracing the genesis of this transition from one side of the Atlantic to another. Where have you been most recently in Africa?
Most recently I was in Ghana, and I was at Cape Coast Slave Castle and Elmina Slave Castle. So that's the most recent visit.
All right, let's move back across the Atlantic. You have been to the Ellis Islands. You've been through that, and you've seen the Statue of Liberty up close. Tell me about it. I see the catalogs here.
Yeah, you know, this would be the first time a couple of weeks ago that I actually visited the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island. I think there's a part of me, you know, that had a vague curiosity, but because of the information that I kind of already knew, I never felt really all that, you know, compelled to go. But I decided, you know, a really good friend of mine who now works and basically is looking at trying to improve a lot of things around, you know, these national parks. You know, he said, you should go, Joyce. So I went. And because I had already seen renderings, I'd been to France and was aware that there were various models of what the ultimate Statue of Liberty was to be, replete with chains. So I was very curious about how that would be handled. I also knew that the architect, the artist, and the you know, basically the producers, if you will, of the Statue of Liberty decided upon this statue in 1865. So of course this coincides with the end of the Civil War and the consequently the end to slavery. The chains, which originally were in her left hand and at her feet, were struck from the statue, clearly. But I was waiting for an opportunity on my tour to ask the tour guide. So the tour guide, you know, very enthusiastic man, he said, you know, he's kind of explaining all these details. And so right off the bat, he says, are there any questions? I said, well, my question is, what happened to the chains that were originally on the Statue of Liberty? And he looks at me and he goes, thank you for asking that question. We will cover it a little later. So I kind of waited, and we went through, you know, showing the dimensions and all of that, and I just waited. And finally, we got to the point where they actually had the different statues of those who were responsible for building the superstructure that it sits on, which is on top of a fort, all of these different things. And he said there was a little argument that went on. The artist wanted to really fought for the chains. He says, I really want those chains there. They were a part of acknowledging as a gift from France this idea of liberty and freedom, specifically one of the issues being the end of slavery, which, of course, the chains represent. And there were those in America that opposed it, saying we don't want it to be specifically focused on slavery. We want a broader sense of liberty. And there were all these various beliefs about why they didn't want it. So what used to be a left hand holding the chain became her clutching what looks like tablets. I said, well, help me understand how we reconcile. Send us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. Help me understand how you reconcile that with the absolute obliteration of anything that suggests that slavery had anything to do with it. How did they reconcile that hypocrisy? And his answer was, I don't know how they reconcile what was an obvious hypocrisy. However, the chains are still there. I said, really?
Where?
Exactly. So I said, because I was there. I was literally there. And I said, well, are you kidding me? He goes, no, they're there. He says that was the one thing the artists fought for and won, that they would never be able to remove completely the chains. So then he pulled out the picture of the statue with the chains, and then he showed the chains, blown up picture of her feet, and there are chains there at her feet. However, they are not visible. The only way you can actually see those chains is if you happen to be in a helicopter looking down, okay, but from the pedestal.
With a zoom lens.
Yes, with a zoom lens. Shot. But from the pedestal, from anyone walking around, they are not visible. And I thought to myself, they are invisible like we are.
Let me ask you what might be a touchy question. Were any of the guides that you could see burnt of skin?
That would be no. Not that I could see. Most of the guys were European, or of European descent. And part of, I guess, my concern is I was coming, you have to understand, there were huge groups of people. Among them were children. Among them were students from elementary through high school. Latino, African, all, these children, on their field trip to the Statue of Liberty. And I thought about that as an educator and thought to myself, how unfair, how unjust, how inaccurate for them to walk through and see no reflection of themselves, when in fact the originator had them in mind. And here these black children are with no clue, and I'm wondering, because I'm going back tomorrow. I'm going back
right.
Because I want to see unasked if they'll volunteer the fact that those chains were there. Because I wanted these children who basically could go through, walk around, and never know anything about these chains. And here's the other travesty. These are the materials they gave me. Anyone that comes, they'll see there's a Statue of Liberty one, and then there's the Ellis Island. There is no mention of it. Now, he showed it to me, but it's not mentioned in the literature. So again, it begs the question, why is that? Why is it erased? Then I went to Ellis Island, and then it gets clear why it got erased. So I come to Ellis Island. Now, you gotta understand, I'm ambivalent, because I recognize there's two things that are going on inside of me. One is understanding the whole process of immigration and folks coming over, even though they were not sure what the life would be, it was going to be a better life. They were choosing something different. Many of them, not all of them, but most of them, were looking for a better life, despite the fact that they had no clue as to what that would mean. So you come in, you're issued into a huge hall, and there's a room that I now learned is called the peopling of America. Whatever.
What does that mean?
You'll see. So I go in, and of course there's an entire tour. There's an audio tour. So I got the audio tour of a friend of mine and I, and they're talking to you through all of the little parts. But before you get to that, there's another room, which is the peopling room, peopled. So I'm over here, and I'm looking around, and on one side, on my left, is a huge screen, and on my right is a chart. And on the chart are the little, figures of the number of immigrants coming in from particular countries, right? So you see a lot of them, a little bit, and you see years. So I'm looking at that, and then all of a sudden, I noticed that there's a little legend, and the legend says, I want you to hear this, it says, non-voluntary immigrants.
Non-voluntary.
And I'm thinking to myself, well, now, can they just not say the word slaves? I mean, but you see, it got sanitized. And one might think, if you saw non-voluntary, that they just kind of got lost and showed up. Maybe they accidentally happened upon the land. But you wouldn't know they came in the belly of ships, that they were raped along the way, that they were chained in their excrement. You wouldn't know that. You just think of them as, well, they're non-voluntary immigrants.
All right. Time for another break.
All right.
We'll be back after this. All right, let's talk about some present-day issues. There's an economic depression that some call a recession and argue about that. But what is your diagnosis of the impact that it is having on the African American community?
Well, I think just very simply put, you know, those that are struggling or that have the less, you know, economic means are going to suffer greater. And it's always been that way. You know, I've often thought about the Depression, you know, the Great Depression. And I, in school and even the media, you know, there's an incredible history of pictures of people in soup lines, and there are pictures of people, you know, families kind of living in this. There is almost never anyone black identified. Because if you were to contrast that with the black experience during the Depression, again, white man has a cold, black man has pneumonia. So what we're seeing in terms of this is a greater desperation on every level, economically, socially. Everything is becoming much more heightened in terms of the African American experience, because again, the having little and then having what you have that is there taken away, there's a greater level of desperation, a greater level of fear, of anxiety, of suffering. So yeah, it's much greater.
Do you pick up much anger in the communities where you speak, African American communities? Anger
with regard
to the greed factor that many.
But here's the thing, and this is being talked about quite a bit. That when people start talking about we're going to have this war on crime and war on drugs, and we're going to go after it, and what's depicted in the media, and we got numbers of police shows where you see them taking down the drug dealer and they're slamming them into the cars, and this is the drug dealer who had the little drug, and they busted it, and everybody's going, my goodness, how great. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? This is how you're dealing with the drug trade? The multi-billion-dollar drug trade is by Joe Kid on the corner selling drugs and arresting him and his whole crew and maybe his family, and now everybody can sit comfortably. And we've not considered the fact that, well, there got to be folks that export it, that own the planes, that own multi-billion. It's not him, but the distraction is him. And those who are struggling there down at the bottom say, excuse me, you're coming after me. How about the old boy that just went to jail that stole billions of dollars? How about him? Who's the bad guy here? And so what ends up happening is you create, and this is something that David Cole assessed. He talks about the whole idea of race and the criminal justice system, race and class, and the whole idea that there is it has an opposite effect. People are less likely to feel like I need to conform to the codes and the morals and the laws of a society that is not just to me, and that somehow turns its head when it comes to those who are really reaping the benefits economically of crime. And you pick the crime, white collar, blue collar, whatever collar you want. You begin to look at who's reaping the benefits of that. And they don't look like the people who we see on television being arrested. And so there is this kind of feeling of antisocial, if you will, a reluctance to embrace or to trust a system that identifies them as a culprit. And when we begin to look at it, when you unfold it in round, I mean, it goes on and on and on in terms of who's doing what and who's making the big bucks with crime, straight up crime. But once again, it gets sanitized, you see, because I don't know, they're wearing suits, they're white, I don't know, but it gets sanitized. So you have this kind of anger that's reverberating on the ground where folks are trying to survive. And no crime is okay, don't get me wrong. The crack dealer is no better in terms of his behavior and her behavior and engaging in that. But why is it this person here is demonized for that behavior? And yet these other individuals, I don't know, they get, luxury cells while they amass these fortunes and literally impact nations with it.
With the evaporation of jobs, especially in the African American community, this must cause great trauma in the household.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk about that?
One of the things that I live in Georgia, and one of the things that we're seeing is with the increased desperation becomes an increase in all other sorts of things, like, for example, stress and anxiety. So it has a physiological impact on people where the stress is producing illness. Not only is that stress producing illness, but it's again producing a level of desperation where people are becoming much more fearful, not really seeing a way out in some ways. And so there's two things that happen. Again, I've said it before in the show: you implode or you explode, and both are happening. And part of it is economics. Part of it is it's relentless. There's no lift for it. And again, we have disintegration happening on a variety of levels because you have there's this kind of romanticized idea about America and what America, again, start going back to the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island. One has to ask the question, where are these things for us? Now, the average person goes, well, if you just work hard and you just keep your nose clean and everything will turn out okay.
Work hard where? At what job?
This is my point. It's got to be your fault. And if you start looking at this in terms of Elizabethan poor laws, this come out of Europe, they considered it some sort of a moral, spiritual deficiency for you to be poor, and they put you in jail for it, right? Something got to be wrong with you morally, spiritually, that you're poor. Right? So you have this kind of feeling that people, and then the guilt associated with it. Why can't I get myself, why can't I? Again, there are no resources, and particularly in your community. But then whose fault is that? Well, if you people would just, we don't own the communities.
Yes, I've heard that phrase.
So all of those things that are set up, and far be it for me to, to look at and simplify the entire dilemma associated with the economic system in America, but we have to appreciate that people, are hardworking, good folk just trying to do their lives. I see them all over the country, but they're demonized.
Okay. We'll be demonized if we run over too much. So let's try to undemonize. We'll be back. All right, as you were pummeling me in our station break, there's some areas that you wanted to ventilate on.
Two of them. The first area being kind of my final assessment in being in Ellis Island, and the other is looking at remedy and response to kind of a parallel process from Africa to here. When I told you I saw the thing about Africans, which is the only thing you see about black people is the non-voluntary immigrants. And then there's a huge screen, which if you don't pay attention closely, it looks like some beautiful parts of the country. It's a moving kind of video thing. Mm-hmm. That's about natives. And the number of tribes that it started off, and then how they were, quote, reduced. Again, we're going to clean that up because we're not going to talk about, well, they talk about the diseases that affected them, but how about what amounts to genocide? Okay, those words aren't used. slaughter, genocide. No, reduced numbers. Then we move on, and what I want to speak to is when we start talking about how do we remedy this, how do we teach children of color, in particular in America, African-American children, to feel good about who they are, to strive, to want to achieve, to not feel helpless or victimized or any of those things that people get all twisted about. We go through, and you get to a point where it goes, imagine what it would feel like. A place you've never been, you don't know if you're going to be able to stay or go. Imagine what it must feel like living in these quarters. And I'm looking at the quarters, and these are like bunks, hammocks, 2 sinks. Looks pretty good to me, right? I'm going, imagine what those non-voluntary immigrants experience. And if you're going to put this picture up, put that one up too. How dare you ignore, because you want me to empathize. You want me to feel the struggle and the suffering and the fear, and I'm okay with that. But who cries for them? The 10,000 buried in the African burial ground that's not on the tour. Where is the empathy for them? Where is the headphones saying, imagine? Not only not wanting to go, not knowing where you're going to go, and having your children, your wives, your people raped in front of you. Imagine that. Not wanting to go and not knowing where you're going. Where is the picture there? They were issued into another room where they say, and then they underwent medical prodding to determine if they were fit to stay or they were going to be sent back. And in this case, and I look closely because you know me, I look closely because I said, possibly could it be? 1800s, we got to find J. Marion Sims in here, and surely his speculum is there. The speculum used to evaluate European women coming through. But did they tell you when they showed you Sims' instruments, the one who's standing in Central Park, that those instruments were developed by experimenting on black women? No, you see, that's not said. It just says, look at this instrument he developed, and these poor women had to undergo these sorts of examinations. Do you see?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm watching this, and while I can empathize with that, who empathized? Where are the tears? Where are the tears? Where is the empathy of America? And that, to me, is part of the problem with why we're seeing a society of people who are done.
When we were on our way to the studio, you mentioned the desire to drop some reality around the shoulders of Thomas Jefferson.
Yes. And again, if people would read it, it's really clearly there. Thomas Jefferson, and in the close of my book, the soliloquy of Thomas Jefferson was fully aware of what the impact of the long-term impact of enslavement would be on white people and black people, and everybody in between that were confused. He talked about the horror associated with slave masters did, and that their children imitated the behavior among their friends and younger children that were enslaved, and that built into a sickness on the part of Europeans and a hatred and antipathy on the part of Africans. And his greatest fear is that it would end in extermination of one or the other race. He says, because God cannot side with us, meaning Europeans, in this contest. He cannot side with us, which means God will side with them. And it is only his hope. He says, indeed, I tremble for my country when I consider that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever. So Thomas Jefferson not only knew at the time the wrongness associated, but recognized the long-term impact that it would have. Clearly, these are his words. I'm not making this up. But again, it somehow gets absent of the curriculum. Somehow it gets removed, and we talk about all the other things that he was able to expound upon. And I think that if we're talking about healing, if we're talking about a response, we have to look and understand historically how the injury transmitted itself, what it looks like then, now, and then contrast that with Africa.
How can there be any healing if you don't get the right medicine?
Well, first of all, here's how it's got to start. It's got to start with unearthing the truth.
Yes.
Got to first start there. But you see, again, you have to ask this other question. What is the fear? I always look at these things and go, what is the fear of unmasking it? What will that mean? Not just to the people themselves, like Native people and African people and Latinos. What will it mean for Europeans to unmask it? And like I said very clearly, it'll mean little Brittany and little Tommy will see a different face of the America that they've been taught about. They will see something that isn't pleasant, hence non-voluntary immigrants, instead of enslaved people who were sold and chained and bred like animals. You see, that's a different picture. So what will it mean to unravel it? It'll mean that people have to look at this square, and they're going to have to own what has happened and recognize that this history is an important history. It is American history. And yet there is this feeling like, well, it's just so unpleasant. Those chains, wouldn't that be unpleasant to see those chains on the Statue of Liberty? Not if those chains represented what they were supposed to represent, and that was true freedom. It wouldn't be a sense of shame. It would be a sense of pride. But because it didn't do that, send us your tired, your poor, did not happen for people of African descent. Those chains would spell the total oppression which has occurred up until the current recent apology by the House of Representatives.
Okay. Another break. We'll be back. So you're saying that not only do people of African descent need to have this therapeutic process in order to regain self-esteem and motive to move forward, but whites need it too.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. You know, that the absence of this truth is a perpetuation of an ignorance that will result in all of our demise. And so what I think is that the fear associated with the truth, I think, is what is creating the problem. And I think once you get it out, we can begin to extricate it. We can begin to deal with it. But there's been so much denial, fear, guilt, pain, all of those things associated with these truths that we don't recognize that this thing is festering into a hot mess that doesn't have to. One of the things, again, the purpose of my work and even looking at this is, you know, not only was it a part of my own kind of growth and development, but my purpose was to try to look at what did we lose along the way? What do we need to recapture? So my focus right now, which is, you know, all of my work is really focused on healing. It's all focused on education, on learning. So the first learning was, what was it like in Africa? What is it like in Africa as it relates to Africans? What was injured through American chattel slavery and the oppressive eras that followed American chattel slavery was the destruction of relationships. If you were to kind of boil it down, I want you to stay with that theme because it is the focus, the matrix, if you will, that we use to get back through. And part of it is to look at what were relationships like. Well, it was collective, people worked together, there was this whole sense of tribe, the connection to land, all those things. Then you had chattel slavery, folks getting ripped off, taken places, traumatized, untreated by that trauma, continuing perpetual trauma. What did that result in? Well, from an African vantage point, as a result of that collective, that village, you have respect, you have honor, you have nobility, you have this sense of self, trust, all of this. Now, what do you have when you have a destruction of those relationships?
Chaos.
The polar opposite. You have the polar opposite of that. You have people who are suspicious, who are fearful, who are distrustful, are not willing to work with other people, that have fragmented senses of themselves and other people, and thus you have this kind of fractioning that continues to happen. So a question that comes up with, weren't we doing better at some point? That's always a question. And the truth is we were. During segregation, we started doing better because we started having to deal with things on our own and building some sense of that community back. Then it got fragmented by, hey guys, come on over here, we'll treat you like everybody else. So now we want your money, we want your community, we want your land, we want all of that in exchange for equality. Well, that wasn't true. Clearly wasn't true. So what happens then? So now what we're left with is this response. We're left with this fragmentation. The key is through the relationships. Recently on Black in America, there's a gentleman shown. This gentleman has a 100% success rate of getting young black students in college. 100%. I'm so happy he was there. The natural question I would ask is, hey, I got it. Let's replicate that. How about we replicate it? Because this is not rocket science here. But what does he have? And the reason why it's not so easily replicable is because it's him. Okay? Hence, he has a relationship with those children. He picked them up. He put them in his car. He put his heart, his soul, his life. Can you replicate him? Well, he's not the only one. But if you, I would venture to say, and I would submit to you, every program, whether it's rehabilitative, whether you're dealing with youth, after-school programs, any of them, that the common element is relationship. Because you see, that's what's fractured. If I believe you trust me, you believe in me, you love me, young, old, in between, it is going to foster a sense that is going to have me not only believe but achieve. And that's something, an element, not rocket science. Look at any program, and you'll find that, well, when it comes down to it, they cared about me. They worked with me. They were there for me. They had my back. Those are all statements which suggest a relationship, which was firmly said at one point, that became fractions now. So how do we get it back? How do we begin to create those things? You can't create a person, but that heart, that spirit is all over this country. It's black. It's not always black. You'll find it, you know, like how do you replicate Mother Teresa? Okay? She was who she was. Martin Luther King, Malcolm. You see, there were those who have always would arise who felt that. But there are also many people who feel it. And that's the key, is to heal the relationship where it is. Where it is. And those young people believe in him. I would venture to say that sometimes programs here that are rehabilitative, prison, whatever it is, that when that person is removed, you throw money at it. Let's get 4 more buses. Then you get further away from what? The relationship, and you begin to see a different result. Because of the nature of the injury, it is the relationship that is most critical.
Okay, time for a last break. Malcolm X once said that land is the basis of independence, you know, and it moves me to ask a question. Can you name any part of this planet where we dwell and control the economy where we dwell?
Sometimes we look like we control the economy. I don't know. Honestly, I'm sure there are areas probably not very large.
Like this?
Yeah, not very large.
Where would you place that in your agenda for
healing?
Some healing.
Economics is right up there at the top. It really is. I mean, you know, so much of this has to do with, you know, again, there's a point at which you don't care if you like me. It's not about you liking me. It's about me having the right to exist and to be independent and to be able to survive in my environment in a manner that is appropriate and fair and just. So justice is critical, and justice implies equity as it relates to financial issues, and we know that that's huge. Of course, everybody knows that's huge right now.
Because it's a shock to go to Africa and see the total domination of African countries by Europeans.
And Chinese. Yeah, at this point. Yeah, Chinese.
In growing numbers.
In growing numbers. And again, I think that we have to recognize that we have to function as a global society. And a global society has responsibilities. Now, we can ignore that if we'd like. And I think that just like we ignore the global ecological system, you can ignore it if you like, but it eventually comes back to get you, all of us, you know. And I think similarly, as we begin to look at these economies of countries all over the world, we look at the Sudan, and we look at, you know, things that have gone on, just basically we've turned a deaf ear. Ultimately, that's going to reverberate back because we are a global society.
And what goes around? It
comes around, you know. And really, you know, I think that there has to be a matrix. And I am, of course, on the side of the hands-on, working with people, and that's great. But at the end of the day, they don't have a place to live and can't eat and can't work. I don't care how good that make them feel. Okay, I don't care how clear they are about their identity or their connection to their ancestral roots. If I don't have a place to sleep, I cannot gain food. I cannot care for myself or my family. Now we have a whole nother ball of wax. You see, it has to be a parallel process that not only must we start looking at ourselves and, you know, getting rid of certain behaviors, which I created a matrix to do that. We can begin to extricate that.
How can we self-examine? By what process?
There are a lot of processes, I think. the one that I've created and the one that, I've been working so long looking at this enough to go, okay, so how does one look at oneself? In my study guide, which is now printed and will be available very, very soon, within weeks, this study guide, there are parts of it where there's a matrix. So I give you examples from the book of what is vacant esteem, what is racist socialization, what is anger, what does that look like, starting with enslavement. Well, those are clear. There's certain behaviors that happen, and then there are behaviors that came out of that. Self-hatred, good hair, light-skinned. What is that term? High, yellow, gone to waste. Crazy stuff, right? You have that. You have this anger, this distrust, this ambivalence that you have to deal with. And then you have this socialization process which continues to lie to you. Well, how do you begin to eradicate that? Then you look at it, what does it look like in my family? For example, you look at your own family, brings you all the way down to yourself, and then it says, what is your response with all you know now? Now that I understand where it came from, I understand what it started to look like, then I looked at how Mama and Grandpa and Cousin and Pookie dealt with it. Now I got to ask myself, with all this knowledge, what am I going to do? How am I going to perceive myself? Am I a Negro? Am I colored? Am I the N-word? Am I black? Am I African? What are you going to tell your children? And what of that information as you go through this matrix, this flow chart that helps you see it? What of that information is going to change now that you're going to share with the other generation? Not just with my family, but with the kid down the street and in the schools and within systems. How does one look at it? But you got to first be able to see the flow. That's the problem. We see enslavement. We don't see what that got to do with us. You got black kids right now that go, Afro, I don't got nothing to do with Africa. Right now, I don't have nothing to do with Africa. And if you look at the lyrics of Lil Wayne, it's scary, right? So you have all these different things. How did that happen? Where did it go amiss? That's why there has to be an assessment process. That's personally. On the flip side, there has to be justice. Has to be justice. Because while all of this is going on, there has to be a system by which I can plug into that is just, fair, equitable to me and safe. So one cannot happen without the other. There's a matrix. We can
Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will.
Never will.
Frederick Douglass said that.
That's right. That's right.
You concur?
I concur.
So we've got to find the tools and the weapons to bring that about.
Parallel process. We got attorneys. We got folks in political positions. We have folks in criminal justice. We have folks, social service, down on the ground. We've all got to show up for this one. And everybody else out there that's interested. We need to show up for this.
Why the absentia? Why aren't enough? We used to have a word in the community where I grew up called jive.
Yeah, we have a lot of words that mean the same thing, I think that, again, that we, he who's in the frame cannot see the picture. That is largely what it is, And then there's some folks that say there's no picture at all, So we've got to get at the very root of things. And again, it's okay for us not to agree. It's okay for us not to, because we're all different people. But we got to understand that what's in the frame.
There just isn't enough time ever to talk to you.
Never.
We're out of it. Thanks for being with us.
You're welcome.
Thanks for being with us.
All right, there you have it. Another heavyweight. Joy DeGour. Okay, one more time from Dirty Little Secret. This time, we're on page 14. Now, this right here, pay attention to this now. The old English adage, the title of this is President of the United States arrested by a black policeman. I'll read it again. President arrested by a black policeman. The old English adage that the king does no wrong does not apply in America. President Ulysses S. Grant was probably the first and only American president to be arrested. And it was a black District of Columbia policeman who performed the deed. In the late 19th century, Officer William West was on duty at 12th and M Streets in Washington, D.C., when he noticed a horse and carriage approaching him at a frightening pace. Dashing into the oncoming traffic, Officer West grabbed the reins and brought the carriage to a halt. Looking inside and recognizing President Grant, Officer West apologized profusely and waved the president on. But President Grant, aware of the public relations nightmare in appearing above the law, insisted that Officer West book him for violating the district speeding law. Officer West took the president to the nearest police precinct. For professionalism as an officer of the law, President Grant later promoted Officer West to a mounted policeman. There you have it. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take another quick break, and we will be back. Y'all hold on a moment. We'll be right back. Okay, everybody, we back. The clock is winding down. I need to make the announcement, and don't y'all forget that on October the 26th, right here in Jacksonville, Florida, we have the Black Vegan Fest. We have live entertainment. We'll have real professional chefs down here. Not only cooking and preparing food, but teaching you how to do the same thing. You bring your whole family, the children, and we show them how to plant food. You'll be seeing how we do this thing down here in Jacksonville, Florida. Okay? All right. Let's roll on down the line. Y'all hold on. Another heavyweight.
Good evening and welcome to part 2 of our interview with Mr. Amos Wilson, author of The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child. Mr. Wilson, in part 1, you said that the black man's, the black woman's goal of equality with the white man is a low goal. Would you expound on that simply?
Particularly when equality is equated with sameness. The idea of being equal as being almost non-distinguishable from the whites or the so-called European. Because when I look at the kind of world that the European has made, I see equally sharing that world with him or expanding it and not changing it is to a degree meaning equally spreading the misery that's current at this point. We see, for instance, we look at European leadership today, we see European leadership, for instance, that's incapable or seemingly incapable of maintaining peace, that seems to be almost definitely headed for a third world war. A European system wherein you have enough weaponry now to destroy the earth and to kill people, what do you say, several times over, as if people could die more than once. A leadership that has polluted the world and threatens to destroy the ecosystem of the world. A leadership that still maintains vast amounts of discrimination and exploitation of other people as such. I then cannot see that sharing that kind of world with them as a goal for black people. As a matter of fact, we must bring a world that is superior to the current one, and I think black people, as well as other people, should be concerned about bringing onto the world stage a civilization that is superior to the ones that the Europeans have set here, or else we will just rush it further into the destructive direction in which it's going. We see a European society now, for instance, that is confused in terms of its values. Not only then are black people suffering in a sense.
Why you say it's confused?
Well, we look at the American system today where religion, for instance, no longer has much authority in the direction of people's lives, and apparently the law is having less and less direction in people's lives to such a degree that everybody's sort of gotten into the me generation business, as if we are going to only be able to survive and maintain ourselves in this world by contemplating our navels or getting into ourselves, getting into self-awareness, as if the maintenance of orderly, productive human relations is not important, you see. And yet we cannot each do our own thing totally as such. That leads to chaos as well. But this kind of me orientation that we find, this type of narcissism that is quite apparent in this country as well as other European countries, you see, to me indicates a situation where people now have lost a sense of direction, as well as this inability to say, for instance, stop going in a direction that is obviously self-destructive. You got a situation here, for instance, in the United States where you have enough weaponry to destroy everyone, and yet the military budget grows and grows by leaps and bounds, and the same thing with the Russian situation.
In connection with that, you said something earlier before the program. You talked about what you perceive to be the real purpose of the neutron bomber. We want to get back to the black child thing, but would you touch on that, please?
Yes, this sort of goes over to an area I think that we as blacks should discuss more and more. While civil rights is, of course, very important to us and is a central issue in our lives, I think by stressing it, we have sort of overlook many of the other things that are going on in the world. Of course, this has been in part built by our culture, too, in the sense that whites sort of only invite blacks to programs, other things, when civil rights seems to be the thing to be talked about. We are often misled by the media. As a matter of fact, the media is used to hypnotize black people and to maintain black people in a state of hypnosis. And it does this by deceiving them and by focusing their attention in non-essential areas. For instance, my reading of the so-called neutron bomb, this bomb that supposedly leaves things standing, I think the projection of the American news establishment has been that this bomb was essentially developed to deal with the Russians, particularly to deal with Western Europe in defense as against the Eastern European armies attacking them. But I think another aspect that has been overlooked was the aspect that the bomb was essentially developed to deal with third world nations. For instance, to bomb the Mideast and leave the oil wells standing. And not too much to stress the imagination to see the bombing of African peoples and leaving the resources available for exploitation as such. And I think we as a people should think about these possibilities. And we should look beyond media programs that seek to focus our interest in another direction completely to our own disadvantage. For instance, I think if we look at the so-called Columbia program, the Columbia space craft, we get, again, the news media gives us this hype, about whether they'll get up and come down safely and so forth. But the actual military implications of that for third world peoples and the implications of how that helps to maintain the domination of the European over us, of course, is not looked into. How is that system being used, for instance, to put up military satellites and to develop laser weapons and other things that will be used, for instance, to blackmail third world nations? But besides that, how is it used in the communications network so that nations and African nations, for instance, and other nations of the world will be flooded by English-oriented programs, European-oriented programs, again, maintaining the European position and educating our people in the European position.
Is it any accident that no black man has gone to the moon, etc.?
Certainly, I don't think it's an accident. Of course, I think it's just a further extension of keeping black people or non-white people out of very important programs as well. However, I think other than blacks getting into these programs, which I think is a laudable goal to a degree, of course, we may be about developing our own. I think this is one of our major problems in that we as people do not think about doing these kinds of things on our own. I'd like to see, say, those ships taking off from the continent of Africa run by Africans as such. But we as black people have to begin to imagine that being the case.
And black men have helped to develop this country's space program.
Definitely. The unfortunate part about it is we don't transfer a lot of the knowledge that we've gained from working with this country to our own people. And I think this is the crucial position of black men and black women in this country, is to transfer knowledge and information gained to our own African countries and our own people of color the world over. Okay. For defensive purposes, as well as possibly for offensive ones, or for entering into other worlds as such.
Okay, I want to...
The other thing is, you see, I don't think it would be enough, for instance, for a black child merely to dream of being on the spaceship with white astronauts, or to dream of being a part of a program. For, to me, that helps to maintain the servant mentality that is too prevalent in the black community. We are just an extra, or we're taken along as an extra as such. I'm looking forward to black men being the masters of space, let us say, being in control of space, let us say. So it won't be enough to just ride along and be along. We must have our own space program. We must explore our moons and the other sides of the world, because it is only out of mastery and the desire for mastery, and what may be a very bad word, the desire for power, that mental growth takes place, you see. To opt for equality, as we've done too much, does not put enough emphasis on mastery of ourselves and our destiny and so forth.
You said in a previous conversation that there's a difference when you see a child who's going to school to master something, as opposed to become a master, that is, as opposed to becoming a servant. What is the difference in the child?
The major difference is on how he interacts with the information that is being developed in the classroom, and how he perceives that information and how he's going to use that information. To a good extent, a person who's not headed for mastery, let us say, essentially is interested in learning what as against how, you see. And to a great extent, then, his approach to knowledge is passive. And he's more or less, he becomes more interested in memorizing and remembering what is told him. And he's learning more to take orders than he is to give orders, you see. And to a great extent, many of our so-called educated blacks, our very highly educated blacks, have still been educated in that mode. So you go to, and unfortunately, many of us go to school to get a job, for instance. We don't perceive it as a part of a massive effort to attain control and mastery of our situation, and ultimately to outdo the Europeans. You see, one of the major problems we have as a people is, and one of the major functions, let us say, of Eurocentric psychology and sociology and history and so forth, has been to convince non-white people of the invincibility of white people, to convince us that the white man is not capable of being defeated, that he cannot assume his minority position in the world as he is. This being the case, then, and it has made us then think, well, we have to accommodate him. We have to get along with him. Oh, he's going to, we have to live with them because they are in control and so forth. Well, that leads to a type of attitude toward learning that means that you are not going to try to outlearn him, outthink him, outmaneuver him, you see. So if you're going for mastery, you see, then the knowledge becomes very important, and you see it as a tool for advancing your own power interests in the world. If you're not going for mastery, you just see it as a means of being able to carry out efficiently the orders that are handed down. It also limits creativity, because if we are to defeat the Europeans, if we are to master this earth and take back this earth from the European, then we must outthink the European. We must then be creative. That puts the learning emphasis on the how-ness, the how to think as such, and to the use of knowledge as a tool of mastery. It's a very different kind of thing, very different emphasis.
Let me ask you this, backflipping some. We talked earlier about the fact that in the 60s...
Pardon me, just I sometimes want to get down to a little more practical implication of what this means. As a result, you see, of the control and the paternalism of Europeans over black people. You see, the other thing that we must recognize, even if the European becomes good and nice and accepts us and so forth, the fact that he would still be in control creates what we might call a benevolent paternalism, which still to a degree helps to maintain this passive mode of thinking and this passive mode of knowledge. Now, when you get into the classroom, you see a child then that wants to be told what the answers are instead of how the answer can be attained. For instance, sometimes in my class, I give an exam, and we're looking at the results of the exam. And the first question we get sometimes is, well, what is the answer to so-and-so and so-and-so? And I have to say, look, you must find that answer yourself. And they get up. The emphasis is quite often then on memorizing the answer. So therefore, reasoning as a tool for finding the answer is thrown out as such. And the child then is handicapped in that if he has not memorized the answer, then he fails the exam because he either knows the answer or does not know the answer. You get what we call one-shot thinking. You see, I'll shoot and guess at the answer. Quite often, it gets into a kind of thinking that depends upon personal feelings. Often I find in my classroom, which is predominantly black, sometimes that I have to get the students to separate personal feelings and hunches from dealing with a problem as a problem that is susceptible to reason, not as a problem that has an emotional attachment to it as such. But you see, when you remove reason and sequential thinking and active attacking of a problem as the mode of approach, then the person is thrown back on memorizing, on guessing, on going with impulses, and on being unsystematic in their approach to knowledge, upon waiting for someone else to give the answer. So what you see quite often with the black child in the classroom is somewhat of a miniature reflection of the orientation of black adults to white people. For instance, to a great extent, black people look at Reagan as some kind of white daddy, and we see this kind of business, please, in a sense, Daddy Reagan, don't do this. Or we're waiting for Daddy Kennedy to come back into the White House. And rarely do we hear a discussion about what are we as black adults going to do to solve our problem. You see, this is communicated to our children, and it's communicated in the way that they, too, wait for the answer. Blacks think that we've been misled by our leadership, for instance. They think that we can consume our way into equality and sees equality as an equality of materials. So if I have the same car as a white person, if I have the same house as a white person, a similar job, then I'm equal. But you cannot consume yourself into equality. You must produce yourself into equality, and you move into equality and beyond by productive thinking. Because as long as you're consuming knowledge or you're consuming material, the guy who is giving it to you or selling it to you is producing at the same time, which means that you never catch up with him because he's always 2 or 3 steps ahead of you. To a good extent, many of our students go into schools, college as well as secondary levels, consuming, and their minds are not being developed to produce the true means by which they will accomplish equality. Everything else is sham.
Just a personal note, when I was going to school, okay, at an illustrious college in this area, I found many of the European philosophies, concepts, etc., to be totally irrelevant to my position in the world. And in my effort to come up with some kind of Afrocentric view, that I was stifled and, received your C's and D's. And how does a student, this is the question, how does a student who perceives that maybe Shakespeare, Milton, and these other people do not provide them with the crucial answers that they must find, how should they deal in this kind of environment?
That's a pretty difficult question in the sense of the kind of control that's maintained in the environment. It sort of leads to what I might call sort of a subterfuge, where sometimes you have to produce, as the Bible verse says, give unto Caesar what Caesar's, and at the same time, though, develop your own. Meaning that the black student quite often is placed in the position of having to regurgitate to his instructors what it is they see as important, while at the same time, outside of that sphere, developing his or her own knowledge through his or her own self-instruction as such. The other facet related to that is, I don't know whether we should really depend upon the European-oriented university to provide us with our cultural education.
This is not European I'm talking about.
But many black institutions are European.
Oh, okay, yeah, all right.
Very European-oriented.
Go ahead.
As such. And the problem is, you have in many instances with the so-called many black professors is the fact that they essentially are representatives of the European point of view. And the only philosophies and orientation they too have learned have been those philosophies and orientation. I think it means that quite often then, if the student's job that was begun in the 60s, where we established African Studies and Black Studies program, has to be completed in the sense where these programs are not just mere electives or things you do while you have nothing else to do. They should be required, in a sense, for black students, and they should, in a sense, be the very first programs that a black student takes.
Why is why is, say, Shakespeare more important than Langston Hughes or James Baldwin? Why is that?
Because the Europeans perceive themselves as more important than non-white people, and it justifies their so-called superior position as such. It maintains and it helps to maintain the so-called unimportance of non-white people as such, and Hughes belonging to that category would not be permitted to be elevated there. It helps to maintain, of course, the power relationship as such, and to also build in values in the black student, to value what is not his as being more important, which then focuses his attentions and energies on what is European. In the sense, it helps to maintain what I call that hypnotized state as such. See, I don't see them as being valuable in the sense of teaching more providing more knowledge. I see them as a part of the mechanism for maintaining a system of control, and which is maintained not so much by knowledge, but by the refocusing of attention, the maintaining, and by the establishment and building in of values. It also reduces the revolutionary potential of black people, because you cannot revolt against a people whose values you share. And therefore, it makes the educated black, were he educated along Afrocentric lines and along philosophies that were very distinct and different from European philosophy, that would set him up then to actually then rebel against Eurocentric psychology and philosophy as such. But since he values that philosophy, the only thing that he can ultimately do is seek reformations to reform the systems, which is pretty much where black leadership has been set. Now, it's not a leadership that's seeking to bring about a new world order, for instance, a world order that's based on, say, different philosophies, but one that seeks merely to share the material culture of whites.
You talked a little while ago about, you mentioned Milton and Shakespeare. This touches on something that you talked about earlier, that is the Marva Collins story out of Chicago, the black lady who did some miraculous, quote, miraculous thing, quote, miraculous thing.
In the context of this culture, yes.
Right, with some black kids, excuse me. Deal with that, if you will.
Yeah, Marva Collins has become quite a celebrity here lately, particularly as a result of her being on this so-called 60 Minutes segment, and as well as a recent drama based on her life. And I think deservedly so, in that she was able, through her own educational efforts, to elevate the intellectual functioning of black children who ordinarily would have been consigned to those categories we mentioned in the earlier show as being learning disabled and unable to read, and move them to such a level that they, as 8th grade students, were reading at high school or beyond high school level, that their scores level on various standardized tests were 4 and 5 grade levels beyond what they were, what they would normally be as such. And that is somewhat of a miracle in this country when you've been fed the philosophy that black children cannot learn, and that they are not interested in learning, and they have all of these deficits. It illustrates in a very practical way that a caring person, a concerned person or teacher in this instance can change and revolutionize a child's way of thinking and dealing with the world and elevating that child's level of thinking. It has many other things about it, too, that I think are commendable. One of the things is that we, as black people, can elevate the thinking levels and change the thinking levels of our children in any way we desire if we assume control of their education. And one of the things that you find...
Okay, there you have it. Professor Amos Wilson, Prophetic Words. This information is vital, and I recommend that we listen to this broadcast over and over until we get this stuff down to a science. And once again, October the 26th, we'll be hosting the Black Vegan Fest right here in Jacksonville, Florida. You can just type it into Google, Black Fest. Either you can go back to the broadcast that I've done with Brother Diallo Shakur. To get more information about this, you can go to type in urban geoponics, and you will be able to see what's going on. You'll be able to have contact information and the like. But anyway, we come to the close of the broadcast, and we will be coming back with part 3 in the final conclusion of the mental cognitive dissonance of those people who believe they are black in America. Okay? I've been your host, Tarhaka Amara L.
the right talent,
the right attitude,
the right game plan,
the right amount of fight, pride, and determination.
When everything comes together, you just feel it.
And you'll let nothing get in the way of your goal.
You're ready to step up, meet the moment, and play to win. If you've been injured, put our force to work for you.
Farah and Farah, here for Jacksonville, here for good.
At Farah & Farah, our philosophy can be boiled down to one word: respect. Respect for every client regardless of who they are or the size of their case. Respect for innocent victims, and respect for the law. So when the insurance company thinks they can bully you instead of paying a claim, we respectfully disagree. If you're hurt, call Farah & Farah. We'll help you get the respect you deserve. Call 800-500-5555. Jacksonville.